get knocked down, but you gotta get up, keep going.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Sovereign CEO podcast. I am Carla Treadway, and I have with me my friend David Charalambous. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing?
So good. Good to see you. It's really nice that we got to hang out in person and then do this. Usually it's the other way around, but now you just feel like a friend. So this is nice and easy.
Yeah, that's much better. It's always nice to meet a 3D version of someone, isn't
Yes, first.
it?
I already know how tall you are. That's always the biggest surprise when you see someone in person the first time. You're like, "Oh, you're
Yeah,
short, you're tall." I was way off.
absolutely.
So, some listeners of the show might not be familiar with your name, so I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro here. You are a behavioral expert. You focus on communications. You're the founder of Reaching People. You talk about NLP, semantics, belief work, communications as a whole. For anyone that doesn't know you and your organization, Reaching People, can you give us a little bit of a background of the work that you're doing right now?
Yes, so March 2020, up to that point, I'd had, I think, over 20 years training in, NLP, psychology, communication, and I'd considered myself pretty good at holding a conversation, pretty good at dialogue, debating people, and all of a sudden, nothing worked. and and it was like talking to people that had been in a different reality for a couple of years, and I was like, wow, what's happening here? And that led me to start researching in depth the government's use of behavioral science and how they were really able to get into people's minds, create certain beliefs in a very short space of time. And we created the project to create dialogue again so people could have conversations, that the truth could arise much better. People would do behavior much more aligned with a rational person, which, there was lots of people that were acting quite irrational ways. And I think that really comes back to what Voltaire said many hundreds of years ago, was if you can, convince me of absurdities, then I can commit atrocities, which
Mhm.
is what we believe is so key. Yeah, so we created the project really to enable conversations at first, did behavior and messaging, and then we found ourselves being contacted by lots of different scientific academic groups around the world. And we've worked with many different countries really to show people why people are not listening is one of the articles we run, how to have better conversations. But to a T, I think most people with knowledge assumed that all they needed to do was share the facts and that would be it.
Mhm.
And I think that assumption has been proven itself not to be the case.
Mhm. Mhm. I know that was true for me. I was pretty slow out of the gates. I didn't really think there was a problem at first. And Natalie, who you met, actually, she was the one that figured out before I did. And she was sending me things that made sense, but it was like there was a veil over my eyes.
Yeah.
And she kept sending things. And, she remained patient and kind. And probably the most impactful thing that she did was she, instead of telling me things, she kept asking me questions that I didn't have the answer to. That slowly started the process. But even still, like I was still stubborn. I was still in it. And there were two big things that I experienced. One was a cardiologist ended up staying at my in-laws' bed and breakfast. And he told us flat out, don't ever get this shot. Here is a prescription and a list of, it was like 6 to 8 different things that I could have at home if my family and I got ill. And I thought, oh, why does no one else have this? Why are they saying this is the biggest pandemic ever and just stay home and there's nothing you can do about it? If you can't breathe, come to the hospital. That didn't seem right. And the second thing was when the health unit was telling my children in school that they didn't need parental permission. Those two things snapped me out of it, but it was like a hypnosis.
Massively, massively so. The the thing that happens is that people, I mean, this might sound as a bit of a shock, but it's kind of funny true, is that in behavioral science, they say, you know, thinking to humans is like swimming to cats. They can do it, but they'd much rather not. So it's really, to think about it. If you go to, you're on holiday, you walk past two restaurants, one of them's busy, the other one's not. What do? You go in the busy one, it's a shortcut. Do you ask to see their safety profile the last 5 years? Do you ask to see all the documentation where they get their food? No, that's real deep thinking, and it's not required in that situation. So we want to take the shortcut. A lot of time, in fact, if we didn't take shortcuts, you wouldn't literally do anything. I mean, if anyone knows a copywriter, you know what I mean? It's too much. So the situation was created that all the shortcuts led to the places that the people pushing the narrative wanted you to go. That was it. So if you imagine there's two pathways, and imagine those pathways are comply and not comply as a binary decision. Most decisions often have 3, 4, 5 options. And in fact, the more options there are, the more overwhelmed people will have. So they've shown through many studies, if you sell 3 jams versus 20 jams, you'll sell a lot more jams when you've only got 3, because people can easily make the decision. So knowing that, sort of the overload of choice, it's called the paradox of choice. What the narrative and the media and the governments did was they pushed one option and they said it's the only way out. And then what they did was they created such pressure that people thought, oh, all I have to do is do as I'm told and we'll be out of this. Okay, there was a group of people that realized something didn't add up. And then that second pathway is the not comply. So to go down the comply route, it was painted with Teflon. Okay, it was so smooth and easy to take that route. To not comply in some countries meant that you couldn't even go shopping. You see what happened? So those people that saw huge danger in complying didn't comply. Some people just don't like complying with what they're told to do. They wouldn't comply. So there's a whole host of reasons that people wouldn't comply. But there's also a whole host of pressures that people felt the need to comply. Sorry, just one moment. We've got someone backing up. Can you hear that?
Nope. No, you're good.
There's a massive alarm going off in the background. So if you can't hear it, just continue. Right. Yeah, so what you have is, it's called choice architecture. And all it is studying how someone will make a decision. Okay. Now, if you understand how a person will make that decision, and some of the reasons are not conscious, and you can affect those reasons, then think about that. You can actually influence someone without their knowledge that they've been influenced. And that's where this technology is, it's there now, and it's so important that people are aware of it, that they then, so for instance, one of them is called the decoy effect. So what it is, coffee shops no longer have 2 options. They pretty much always have 3 options. Okay, most people would choose the middle. So what they did in the early days was they took the small away and put in an extra large, kept the names the same as small, medium, large. And then what happened is everyone's buying the old large, thinking it's the new medium. Okay? So your environment's changed, but your strategy has not changed. So in fact, your choice has changed, but it hasn't been a conscious choice. Then what they show is if they make the middle price close to the large, people then choose the large. And they've done this in cinemas time and time again. So whenever you go somewhere to buy something, a lot of the companies will give you 3 options. And one of them is just a decoy. Okay. But because I know about that, I don't fall for that. And anyone that then finds out about it doesn't fall for it anymore. So awareness is so key in this process.
I'm so familiar with some of this just from a marketing point of view. I do marketing and branding, and we'll put together different price points. Or let's say you want to go get a Express VPN. There's going to be 3 choices, and the middle is going to even stand out from the screen. So there's something visually you can do as well to guide people's decision making.
Yes. Yeah, all of that's happening. And if it's in the interest of the person, then it's kind of, then you've got to think through. But if it's in the interest of the person pushing it and it's not in the interest of the person, then we have a problem. And that's what has happened with the governments, is they've manipulated people for their own gain. that's actually against what people would want or need, or that would help them. And that's why we have a big problem. So we've got this contradiction between who benefits, which is the cue bono. It always goes back to, if you want to find out who's, why something's happening, really often all you have to do is ask who's benefiting from this.
Hmm. Was some of that prepping manipulation the videos that we were seeing of the man in China that was falling over? We
Yes.
all remember that video. We never saw it again, not in real
Yes.
life.
Massively important, and it did a number of things. And what it's called, well, there's one thing is that we learn implicitly far quicker and far deeper than we learn consciously. So basically, if you watch, if I go back 1,000 years, if your neighbor ate some berries off a tree and died, you wouldn't forget that. Okay,
Mhm.
that would be such important information that it sort of burns itself into your memory. And you learn by watching. Okay, so seeing the man drop dead in the street then created a belief in the person's mind that this is dangerous, it's a red flag, I need to watch it. Now, if you try to reason with a person after that video that it's a 99.8% survival, whatever, that will have no effect, because behavior is primarily driven by the primal parts of the brain, the unconscious mind, and whatever the conscious mind feels in that situation. For instance, if someone has a phobia of flying, how effective is telling them the statistics around flying versus driving?
Mm.
Zero effective. If someone has a phobia of spiders, how effective is telling? So basically, when someone has a fear, you can't rationalize with that emotion. So that's why those were used. And in fact, we've had experts look at that and they say, well, the person cannot have been unconscious because their arms moved at the last minute. You can't unconsciously drop face down. Your body won't allow it. Okay. It's like if you were to try to put your hand in fire, all those things, you've got these instincts that come back. Now, there's another reason that that was really important, because it's known as the primacy effect, which is the first piece of information you're exposed to really codes in your mind where to put that. So imagine you're driving to a campsite and the campsite represents your mind. And over one side, you've got mild illnesses, and over the other side, you've got potentially dangerous things. When you see that dropping dead in the street, where do you think your brain files that piece of information? It's no longer filing it with flu and respiratory illnesses. It's now filing it with Ebola and all these other things. Okay. So what happens is the first piece of information forms the foundation, and then everything that comes after it is seen through that first piece.
Mm.
So first impressions are so powerful and so important that what comes after it usually has a lesser effect than that first piece. And that's why when we touch on beliefs, that the first time that you form the first few experiences, which are usually dealing with parents or at school, that you have in a concept around yourself, will often for most people be there for the rest of their lives, regardless of what happens after.
Even if it's not necessarily driven by fear. So,
Yes.
like Canadians, for example, prior to 2020, for most of us, there was this belief that this is the safest, friendliest country in the world. We're not like, ooh, the United States. There's like so much gun violence over there. We can trust our government. We can trust our media. It's safe here. Another example that I can think of is people think I'm crazy when I'm talking about the school system.
Yes.
What's the problem? What are you worried about? And I pulled out these A to Z sex cards that Planned Parenthood was bringing into the classroom
Yeah.
with the most pornographic, like I've never even seen these things as an adult. You wouldn't see this in the worst pornographic movie. And they were bringing this into grade 7 classrooms.
Yeah.
And I brought the cards out and I showed this person. And this weird glaze. When that's not the, I thought they were going to say, oh my God, are you kidding me? No, a glaze. Because the belief is my children are safe in
Yeah.
school. They've always been safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is where the frame in which you have that conversation is really important.
Mm.
Okay. So when you talk to someone about there being a problem, what happens is they usually go into defense and system justification of what's going on. So the brain's just trying to protect what it currently believes. Once you know how to overcome those defense mechanisms, then you can actually get someone into a space where when you show them, they're forced to do something about it. And it takes a lot of skill and practice, but it's definitely something that everyone can learn to do. And that's why we spend so much work on this on the project, because you looked at the speakers at the weekend, the information they have was phenomenal. Okay.
Mhm.
And the assumption is that people respond to logic. And one of the biggest assumptions that comes from a book called The Influential Mind by one of the neuroscientists, I believe it is. And there's a series of these books. And what they do is they put people in fMRI machines. They then bombard them with information and they see what the person responds to. Okay. Now, then what they do, and this is one of the biggest points, and I tried to make this in my presentation, was what we think we respond to and what we actually respond to might be two different things. Okay. So in the book, she makes this quote, which is, if you have something that's really important for the other person to know, you're going to assume that they want to know. And this assumption is not correct. Okay, this insight is incorrect. And therefore, one of the real main priorities of the project is to orientate people to reality, not what they think reality is. Same with, if you think that the school system is protecting our children at the moment, okay, but they're not, that's a contradiction that needs to be highlighted. And what you'll find is that if you try to tell someone that, they will resist and deny it. Okay. But when they have an experience that they cannot deny, that is when everything changes. And that's where how you lead up to giving them or showing them experience is really key. Okay. Because if you do it in the right way, they will, and of course, you've got to be ethical about this, but I'm pretty sure that every parent would want to know if their child is at risk of harm, whether it be mentally or physically. Okay, and that's why this is so key. And if we can have strategies that change this and get people knowing what the actual reality is rather than what we perceive to be, then that's key. And when you look at some of the reasons that that's not happening, the media is playing a major role in that.
Mm-hmm. My father is probably the hardest person for me to communicate with right now. He worked for public health care for the government. He is retired now and he watches a lot of TV at home. He watches a lot of the mainstream news all day long. And I'm instantly triggered because he turned into a really nasty person. And it's funny, I visited actually on my way home and I was thinking about you and I was talking to him. All right, manage your emotions before you even go into this. I wasn't even going to talk about the Reclaiming Canada conference. He ended up bringing it up. And I immediately can feel like the rage building up in
Yes.
me because of how awful he's been the last 3 years. A totally different person, unreachable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you've got is it's going to be, and it depends on the situation. So in every family, you've usually got dynamics going on. Okay. And if you have a father and the father's going to want the daughter to, he's going to remember you as his little girl, and he's not going to want to take medical advice off his little girl. Like, that's what happens. This is quite astonishing. You look at how many of the scientists and doctors with absolute distinguished careers could not get through to their own family.
Mm-hmm.
They got through, and many of them have spoke to me. I spoke to them about this. Like, they couldn't get through to their own family, but some of them got through to millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then you say, well, okay, well, that's a thing. So what is that thing? And it's dynamics. Okay, and it's unresolved emotion, and it's many other things. And we got a bunch of videos on that on the YouTube channel. And one of the things that I think is really profound, that if people realize that if they followed a 20-minute video on how to deal with their emotions around another person, that is probably the single most effective thing they can do to better reach that person.
Mm.
It's literally nothing about the conversation you have with that person. It's all to do with the dynamics you have with that person. And in fact, I had coffee. I don't drink coffee, but I had a tea with someone that was at the conference. They were in the Victoria the next day. And we met up and I said, oh, how's things going? She said, well, it's quite amazing, actually. This morning, I got through to my ex-husband and my father, where previously for the few years I couldn't.
Mm.
And I said, okay, so what changed? She said, well, I approached it in a completely different way. And she said it was really quite amazing that they responded to her. So what's going on is that the people pushing the propaganda, they want us to step in the ring. They
Mhm.
want us to step in the ring with those we're talking to, because they know the minute it gets emotional, what happens is that the mind shuts down and everything is about defending the current belief system. Okay. So the minute you get into that dynamic, you are guaranteed that not a single piece of information will probably make it through.
I
Okay.
can feel myself losing power
Yes.
before I've even said anything. Like I already know I've lost as soon as I'm angry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, this is one of the things, and trust me, I spent many hours on this back in the day. So, as an example, I'd be debating someone on Facebook or Twitter or wherever it would be. In a short space of time, they would start abusing me, calling me all sorts of names, you know, granny killer and conspiracy theorist and everything else. And the rage that would rise inside me. And I'd had a lot of experience and study in this area. So I knew very quickly that I had to deal with this emotion. So what, but here's the key point. You don't want to deal with it. And by that, the brain wants to hang on to this because it gets caught in this weird paradox, because the emotion is a message. But when you process it, and when you get to the point where they can't trigger you, that is a massive advancement, because then what you can do is if you stay untriggered, you can bring them back to untriggered very quickly. Okay.
Mm.
But the minute you trigger, it's basically, we say, don't trigger the gorilla. If you trigger it in them, they're going to be really nasty, which in turn is really likely to trigger it in you. If they trigger it in you, you're probably going to trigger it in them. So in fact, what happens is you just have two gorillas in a, and by the gorilla, we're referring to that unconscious mind that's the primal protection.
Mhm.
So then what happens is if you can then stay balanced and calm, which by the way, do not criticize if you are triggered, because you know it happens very rarely to me now, but it still can happen.
Mhm.
Okay? I can be triggered, but I don't criticize myself. I go back afterwards and I curiously understand it, and then I do some exercises on it, so then next time it doesn't happen again. Then what happens is you get yourself in a position that someone will say, call you a conspiracy theorist, and then you can politely and calmly say, what did I say that was conspiratorial?
Mhm.
Now, if you ask that question in a very balanced way, what happens is you trigger them back into the rational mind, because they have to go to think about it. In order to think about it, they got to go out the emotional mind. So if you can do this enough, and that's not the only obstacle you have, but it's one of the important ones. So then what you think about from a metaphor, it's like you've got this obstacle course, but you've got a blindfold on.
Mhm.
You don't know when you're stepping in all of these obstacles, okay? But when you understand these, and we've listed all the ones we could find out, and the article that we're going to put up in the next day or so is the 10 obstacles to people listening. So what happens is if you then stop treading in those, like a game of snakes and ladders, it's the snake, it drags you back to the front. If you stop doing that, you reach a point of opportunity where then you're talking to this person, and then you can get some ideas for them to be exposed to. And when they have that experience, then you're going to see gradual change. And for some people, you know, it's one of these things that's hard to quantify. The information goes in, it will change them. And when enough information has changed their mind, they come to different conclusions. Okay. If you think about masks, for instance, if you have, say you walk past someone and they believe masks protect them, okay, what's going to happen when you walk past them without a mask on?
Well, they're triggered.
Exactly. They're going to be triggered because you're threatening their health. Okay. What allows them to manifest that reality?
What allows them to manifest it?
They have to first believe that masks protect them. So what you've got is that gives you one insight into what's going on. There's a thing called topical beliefs. It's what we believe about the world. Now, you're probably aware of the pain and pleasure that drives everyone fundamentally. Every organism on this planet moves towards pleasure away from pain. Now, it's not actual pain, it's perceived pain. So, for instance, in a startling study, Norman Dodge in The Brain That Changes Itself quotes a gentleman that studied everyone in an S&M club. And it turned out that every one of them to a T as a child had a serious illness, which they had learned to reframe pain as pleasure. So then when they grew up, they had to stimulate themselves via pain because the only way they coped with it was by to reframing pain. Okay, but we generally move towards pleasure and away from pain, but it's important to understand perception of this. So if somebody has a belief in their mind that success is painful, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to move away from it. So what you have is those topical beliefs are so important because that is why Voltaire said that. Because if you can create these absurdities in people's minds, then they can create anything using those data points. You know, if you think that masks work, if you think the jab protects people, then all the stuff, then you're going to be a bad person if you don't do it. Now, there's another piece to this that's really important, and it's self-beliefs, and it's also survival beliefs. So self-beliefs are really important, and they come from decades of conditioning, but they usually get installed at school or around parents. So if somebody has a belief that they're not good enough, okay, that's going to manifest itself in many different ways. Okay. For a start, it also usually comes along with nothing I do will be good enough. And I can speak from personal experience because I used to have these beliefs. And I had funny enough, a Canadian practitioner who has managed to assist me in realizing that they're not true. But if you have a belief that nothing I do is good enough, imagine what happens to everything you do.
It's
How are
not
you,
good.
yeah, how are you going to see it? Because we don't realize that it doesn't matter how much success you have, you're always going to feel that it's not good enough because it can't ever meet, because it's like a circular reference in Excel. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but it will just the computer just goes, I can't work this out. So you can never really outdo your beliefs. So what do you think happens around most people's beliefs around authority when they're at school? Okay.
Well, it's easy to outsource that one. We can trust the authority. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, as BJ Fogg in his rather profound work, and he's one of the best behavioral guys in the world, and he from what because I've read his work, from what I've seen of his presentations, he seems to have pretty good ethics, which isn't always high up the list of people working in behavior science, and it's not that they lack them, it's just that they're so driven to succeed and do what they are, that ethics often take a back seat, and it's not promoted by the institutions. From what I can see, they give it lip service, a bit like a finance company that says we put our customers first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hear that, but do I see it? And what he showed was that behavior becomes automatic when it gets a positive reinforcement. So what happens is, and it can be an emotion, but it's more an emotional reinforcement. So what happens is something happens, you get emotional reinforcement, and then after a while it automates itself. So you don't think about it. So what happens at school if you do as you're told? You get positive reinforcement. What happens if you don't do as you're told? You get told off. So what actually happens, much like a handshake. So if you raised your hand to shake someone's hand, they would probably shake your hand before they were conscious that they were shaking your hand.
Yes.
It's instinct. So
Mm-hmm.
in fact, what's going on is that most people's instinct is to comply, is
Mm-hmm.
to obey, because they've been conditioned this way. There's going to be a number of people, and I'm probably one of them, that's just a polarity responder, where when someone tells us to do something, we want to do the opposite. Now, they're a useful part of consciousness because they're never going to, you cannot convince them of anything. There's also another group of people that have developed enough critical skills, thinking, and also individual enough that they can go against the crowd. That makes sense. And they're really key. They're the people that will just say, well, the data doesn't say that. But it does become a lot more complex than people think. People think it's just this do the right thing, and there is a big element to it of that, but it's much more the automatic response. And what Zuby said was quite profound when he said, so many people have reached out to Zuby and they said, yeah, I know what's going on. And then they DM him, yeah, and they say, I would speak up, but as he because Zuby's got a high level of awareness, isn't he? He can see through a lot of stuff. And in fact, there's a famous quote from JP Morgan from years ago that said there's two reasons for everything, a good reason and a real reason. So what happens is that when you're challenged to provide a reason why you're doing something, you're always going to look for a good reason. Now, a lot of the time it's not conscious. So the people that were telling Zuby, I couldn't speak up because I had a family, they didn't, I think for the most part, they didn't realize that they were bullshitting themselves.
Yes.
Okay. It made them feel good. It made them do what they could. And there's always some good in at least knowing what's going on, and you can affect at least a few people. But if we can be so honest with ourselves, and I've done this, and it's not easy at times. Sometimes it's very destroying to the ego. If you can be really honest with yourself, and it helps if in a caring way, then we can spot our own bullshit. Okay, because the brain's trying to bullshit us to make us look better than we are, because it's a survival instinct. And if we can get over that, and it's really key, because that structure of, I would, but is very similar to this is because. Wear the mask because, do this because the because actually hides a lot of what's known as a noble lie. The noble lie is basically, if the governments really did care about saving lives, then there would be a number of programs that would reflect that. And this is why we say, don't listen to the words, watch the actions. Because then you see the real reason. And when you look at people standing up, people say, oh yeah, I would stand up. Well, we've seen the situation where those that did, you see their true intentions. And of course, that's not to say that if you've got a wife and 4 kids and you can't afford to take 3 months off work, then we have to understand the pressures of that. I was fortunate not to be in that pressure, but those that had that and still stood up, then I've got a lot more respect for those people. And some of it, like what I saw from yourself and the other people at the conference, I said to someone the next day, it made me want to be a better person, because I saw people not compromising, even though everything was on the line. Yeah. And that's so key. So just double checking, I cleared that point, was that what the brain is going to do is it's going to give you a reason to justify what you're doing. And if you can call to really check if it's really true or if it's just this good. And then, in fact, with the governments, the institutions, the companies, all these things, you can see that because test it. Okay, because they've studied this in depth and they know that it actually doesn't matter what you say after the because. And this is where it gets really, so there's one famous study where they would have people queuing up for a photocopier. People would come along and they'd say, oh, can I push in because I'm in a rush or whatever? And then if they said, can I push in, but said nothing, it was generally 60%. But if they said because, it would go from 60% to 95. So then they said, oh, well, because there's a valid reason. And then they thought, okay, what if we put a stupid reason in there? What happens? So then they said, can I push in because I need to make some copies? Which is no reason whatsoever, is it? Because everyone's in the line to make copies.
Yeah.
Compliance stayed at 95%. Do you see what's going on? So the noble lie, so in the UK press, which is like reading a comic now, it's like reading a parody comic, that they go, heart attacks are caused by, and then just name anything, and you will find a heart attacks are caused by watching Avatar the movie. Okay, they have literally ran these articles continuously. Okay, because they know that person's not going to logically realize it, but they don't care because they're conditioned in the unconscious mind. That makes sense. It's really that the person go, oh, I don't need to look at this because there's a valid reason, and I can just continue on with my day because I've got more important things to do. You see how the manipulation goes so deep.
It is. The thing that I'd always argue with my dad about is I would send him articles or media, and the first thing he would do before he would read the article is he
Just
would
check.
Google like where the source was from or who the doctor was. And he would say, see, I don't need to read it because this
Yes.
is what the media is saying about this person. And that was
Yes.
his buzz.
That is so powerful for a number of reasons because it's known as poison in the well.
Yes.
Okay. So what they do is they poison the well of the person's reputation. And then what happens, and this is a key point. So I've been fortunate up to now because I've just been shadow banned because I know what they're doing and how they're going to come after me. So I presented my information in as much possible way not to trigger the shutdown. Okay. So then people from all viewpoints can look at it and realize, hang on a minute, they shouldn't be manipulating me, regardless of what you believe about everything else. But when they do come after me and when they come after people, you notice they won't attack the ideas.
Yes.
They will attack the person. You can't kill an idea, but you can kill a person's reputation. And in some instances, the people end up dying of mysterious things. People that have been on client lists and whatever, which I won't talk about it. But what you have is it's so powerful, and it really is so important to understand. There's an article by Decision Lab that when people talk to me about politics, I say the first thing is read the article, and it's called The Illusion of Explanatory Depth in Decision Lab. And what I say to them is that one of the biggest shortcuts that most people take is, who am I listening to?
Hmm.
Okay. And when they come to voting, so Seinfeld did a very thing highlighting this on one of the shows. And so Seinfeld's gone with, I don't know who the characters are, and they're at a baseball match, and a guy hits a home run and he gets up and he starts clapping. And they're like, what are you doing? And he said, but 2 years ago we were clapping for this guy. And they said, no, he plays for the other team now. And he goes, oh, we're supporting the jersey. Okay, we're rooting for the clothes, not the person.
Yes.
And that's what's going on, is that most people that are voting for the party that they feel is part of their identity. And then, of course, when it comes to listening, this is why the conspiracy theorist, the anti-vaxxer, the right-wing, blah, 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 they're so powerful because what happens is that there's a lot behind this, but it's effectively in-group, out-group. So it's what's my group, okay, and what's the other group. And the minute you end up with two groups, what happens is they won't listen to each other. It goes worse than that. If you are labeled a conspiracy theorist and you challenge someone on their ideas, it's not that they dismiss your information, but they believe what they currently believe even stronger.
Hmm.
Okay, the studies show this. But if you understand how to, and what's effectively going on is they're not talking to you as a person, they're talking to the caricature of the person that they think you are.
Hmm.
And if you can collapse that caricature pretty quickly, then you can drive a wedge between them and stupid information, particularly a wedge between them and who they think's protecting them when they're not, then everything begins to change. Okay, so there's all these things, but effectively, that strategy of controlling the flow of information. I mean, I did a test the other day, and I used some research tools, and I put Peter McCullough in one of them, and it showed me, the most, I can't remember exactly, but it was like the leading researcher, 900 published articles, cited thousands of times, etc. I think, wow, this guy knows what he's doing. You Google him in Wikipedia, okay, and it's going to tell you he's a misinformation, blah, blah. Now, if someone doesn't know that person, what do you think they're going to do when they see the misinformation? They're going to dismiss everything.
Hmm.
So the media literally paint the hero as the villain and the villain as the hero.
It was funny. I went to everybody's Wikipedia page when doing all the speaker interviews for the event. Wikipedia didn't say anything nice about anyone.
No, and it won't, because see, and there's this thing where you've got people doing bad things and they know they're doing bad things, but it's quite possible that the majority of people doing bad things don't realize what they're doing.
Mhm.
Okay, there's certainly a number of them. How many of them, who can say? But a lot of it's not conscious.
Mhm.
And I think it was Jung that said most of the evil in the world is done because man is so hopelessly unconscious.
Mm.
Okay. If people could see, I think it was Kat Canada shared the other day one of the books, and she's just flicking through page by page on Twitter. And I'm like, if a parent could see that in an objective light, I can't see how they wouldn't have this just startling, realization, cognitive dissonance, whatever happens. But that's not okay. I don't know if you could find any rational person on the planet that would think that's okay.
Mhm.
Okay, they would have to be conditioned in a very strange set of beliefs to think that that was okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the problem is we can't tell people about these things, because when you tell people things, they see the thing through their own belief system.
Yes.
But when you show them, the beliefs will change.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the show don't tell is a little bit more complex than saying binary. And people ask for an example. So if I was to give an example of that, if I walk up to someone and say, ivermectin's good, you should take it, if they believe it's bad, what sort of effect would you think that would have? It would have no effect, would it? But if I tell them a story, so John Swanson's on a ventilator, he's got 3 days to live, true story, by the way, he's got 3 days to live, and they tell the family, there's nothing else we can do. And the family says, okay, well, can we just give him ivermectin? There's nothing to lose. And then the hospital refuses, which in itself should be, hang on a minute, a safe drug on the WHO listed safe drugs for 40, 50 years. Doesn't sound like it's something you should have a hospital policy against. Anyway, the family take the hospital to court. They win an injunction. They fly in a doctor. He prescribes ivermectin. John Swanson's at home 1 week later. Now, when I tell that story, most people go, oh, where can I get this? Whereas when I tell them about it, they just reject it. Now, obviously, it does depend on the exposure that person's had to it. But Tesloe, she's got a number of examples. She had to smuggle ivermectin in chocolate into a patient in the ICU via the husband, right? And then she comes out of ICU a few hours later, and the doctors go, well, it's a miracle. We don't know what's happened. Well, we do, right? And that's the thing and there's a book called Switch by Chad Heath that, if people understand this, it's really powerful, because there was one guy at a company where he found out that they were wasting millions and millions and millions on procurement, which is just purchasing items for the company. And he's telling people, they're not listening. So then he gets his assistant to find one of the worst areas they did it. They found that there was the purchase of gloves. They purchased something like 420 different gloves at various prices. So he rents out the ballroom. He gets an example of all these gloves and he piles them high. People come in and they look at them and they're just silent. Okay. And then he explains to them what's going on, and they're picking up gloves, the same glove, one's $3, one's $20. And they've gone, right, what do you need? Okay. You see the difference? The difference is so powerful that we don't notice it. Is that if you can give someone an experience of what's going on, and that's essentially what's happened, that the people that have become aware to a T,
Mhm.
nearly every single one of them, bar one actually, there's only one lady that ever said, my friend told me it was rubbish and I looked into it. But every single one is someone going, well, my cousin died in a car crash, they put COVID on the death cert. I knew this lady fell down the stairs, they put COVID on the death cert, or blah, 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 or blah, 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 or like you, the doctor comes and stays, because that's different. When it's a
Mhm.
doctor saying blah, 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 it's very different from just your friend.
Right.
So And this is why you look at the censorship. Every video of someone being injured, sharing their story, gets suppressed and taken down. Okay. You had Dr. Boz talking about the study that Kirsch and the other guys did, which looked like a really good study. She had her experts go through it line by line. They couldn't spot any problems with it. Then it got retracted. Okay. And then for her, it's like, hang on a minute. So that contradiction. So she did a video to her 600,000 subscribers saying, have I been conned? You know, and that's an experience. When she experienced them, i.e. them YouTube censoring her channel, that's an experience that she's not heard, she's experienced. You see, and this is the thing.
And then when that starts not working, when it starts crumbling, then they just go really low bar and they start attacking the person. You're a white supremacist, you're a Nazi, you're homophobic. There was a gentleman here in my small town that was telling my gay best friend, well, she's homophobic, you know? And he's like, really? Really? Maybe she doesn't know that I'm gay.
Yeah, exactly. We joke about this. There was a Hold the Line protest, and there's 200 of us standing holding hands. This woman in a mask comes up. I'm standing, I'm holding the hand of a friend of mine. He's from Trinidad. Okay. And she goes, you're racist, you're antisocial. Like, hang on a minute. Like, do you see what you're saying? The woman on her overalls, and this is the thing, this comes out the mouth because a lot of the time people aren't thinking, it's just automatic. Yeah, they're given the script. But here's the thing. Remember the story of Cry Wolf?
Hmm.
There's only so many times they can use that.
Yes.
Okay, at some point it's going to have no meaning for a lot of people.
Words have no meaning. After I was called a Nazi white supremacist, there's really nothing that scares me at, and that was just for not having a vaccine. So, yeah, you're right. Words have no meaning. There's literally nothing you could say at this point that would rattle me.
Yeah, I mean it's so when because I laugh at that because it's so insane.
Hmm.
But if it wasn't so insane, like it would be so like it's just so crazy. This line that's drawn. I mean, I read the leaflet from the protesters, and there was a nothing burger. There was nothing of any substance there. But that's not to say that they don't feel that what they're doing is right.
Hmm.
They may well feel that. There's going to be in all of these things, because people talk about what happens is in the truth movement, the minute you say something or someone says something that another doesn't like, it's usually shill, controlled opposition, all this stuff. But that's the kind of same response of being called a conspiracy theorist. I don't like what you're saying, so you must be on the other side, etc. But if we can get over those, and it's, I'm not going to, it is hard because we're being manipulated at such a level. But the realization of that, for the most part, there are controlled opposition, no doubt. There's the Brigade 77 in the UK. There's all these people that their job is to promote disinformation and create disharmony.
Hmm.
But I think a lot of it is not so much controlled opposition. It's just difference of opinions, inability, and also people being targeted by those other controlled opposition to spread false information to make someone look poison the well so they're discredited. It's such a nefarious thing when it comes to disinformation. And we need to learn to think critically. I think that's so key that we need to understand, you
Hmm.
know, how to look at a piece of information and really assess it, because that's not taught in schools. There's a scientist called John Droz, and he runs a very good newsletter. And he was saying that I think he spoke before Congress, and he was saying that they've effectively removed critical thinking from the science curriculum in the US. It's even worse than that. It's not that they've just removed critical thinking, they've installed adherence to authority. It's part of the curriculum now, how to do as you're told. In science, think about that, where the basis of science is surely the pursuit of truth.
Yes. I was just listening to Jordan Peterson's latest podcast with the strictest head mistress in all of Britain. And she teaches elementary school teachers. And she was saying the one thing that everyone's getting wrong right now is they're saying we need to teach children how to think, but not what to think. And she said, I completely disagree because children don't have enough information to then focus on the skill of how to think. And that's the problem. We're looking at the adults and the university students and we're saying, why don't they understand? Why don't they have critical thinking? She's like, well, it starts in elementary. In elementary, they're just trying to give them skills, but they don't actually have enough knowledge because we're focusing on social emotional learning and social justice instead of basic facts. They need to have enough of that before we can then go to critical thinking in this next generation.
Yeah, and it's like a hotel. Each layer has to build on the top. And a big part of that, which, when you said what's the most important things to talk about, I think beliefs, really, because certainly what I've experienced in myself. So we learn beliefs at a very early age, and then they become programs that run in the background. We don't notice them. So just like if somebody thinks nothing I will do is good enough, they're not going to consciously realize, hang on a minute, externally, that's brilliant. So I've got really good feedback, but I still don't feel that it was good enough. And that's to cover up the underlying belief. Okay. And then what it does is it manifests itself in a compulsive behavior. Okay. So all of that's going on automatically, and the person really doesn't become aware of it. And it's also possible to have contradiction between what you believe consciously and what you do unconsciously. And this is what often drives the imposter syndrome, which is very fascinating. This will be fascinating for you, for the work you're doing. I think it was in Sydney when I was living there, a big study come out and it showed that 95% of CEOs had the imposter syndrome. Okay. So they knew that they were, well, some of them obviously can get there by other means, but if you get to a CEO, you've definitely had to have gone through a number of promotions to at least have some form of skill. But 95% of them didn't feel, they felt like an imposter. And that's very easy to understand when you understand how belief systems operate, because they know via the external evidence that they're brilliant, but they don't feel that they are, because underlying is a belief that says I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy or whatever it would be. There's about 36 that contribute to confidence. And I can say over the last couple of years, I've been working on these with my coach who's in Canada, Bernard, and I had a lot of those set to negative. And what it would reflect it would reflect very subtly. About after a year of doing this work, we had 3 different organizations who were all very ethical, all very good organizations in the freedom movement, ask us to run courses for them. Okay. And I sort of said, yeah, that'd be a good idea. But then I just didn't get back to them, or I would move away from it. And that's my unconscious mind trying to subtly keep me safe. Understand what happens? You can never really outdo your beliefs because you're always seeing reality through your beliefs.
100%.
Yeah. So you can never do anything good enough until that belief that what I do is okay is changed from nothing I do is good enough. And just to finish this point. So when I take it back, where did I get that belief from? My father was a perfectionist, and however I succeeded or whatever I did that was, no matter how brilliant it could have been, he would always say, oh, I could have done that, or you could do better. And then what does the kid interpret? Now, his intentions are probably just to make me a better person, but we don't realize the impact on children and how they interpret that. So if the mother's busy at work, the child might think, oh, that's great because she's providing for me. But that's quite an intellectual thing. The child might say, oh, I'm not important. You see, the key is what the child basically attributes meaning to the behavior becomes a belief once it happens 3, 4 times. And that belief then sits under the surface.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do this with people all the time in business, teaching them to take their emotions out of the equation. Let's say they drum up the courage to run an online workshop for the first time. Nobody comes or 3 people come. insert the belief, I'm not good enough, or no one shows up for me, or people don't like me, probably something that was coming up for them for decades already.
Yeah.
And they might be able to persist like a few more times. And what I try and tell people again and again, I'm like, this is business. It
Yeah.
feels like that. Keep going. Like you just keep doing it, and you have to normalize the experience that we've all done that. We've all failed again and again and again, and you have to persist past that. And you have to, yeah, the fake it till you make it. You have to just trust that if you just keep showing up, people will show up. But if you stop now, that belief's going to be with you forever. You're going to make it a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're not showing up now.
Yeah, well, you see, to add to that, a lot of the time people don't show up is because when they're speaking, the belief is coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in their words, like they might know they're brilliant, but the vibration of the words, and by vibration, it's literally that auditory sound. You can, if you really listen to people intently, you can hear when they're nervous, you can hear when they're angry, you can hear all these things. And we often do it unconsciously, and that's why anger in conversations is very problematic. And a coach with yourself can be very powerful because you can give them an alternate interpretation of what's going on. So that belief that they have won't fire up. That can be a very powerful thing to happen in the moment. And think what could happen if they could actually change the coding of that belief.
Hmm.
And that's the sort of thing where what behavioral science has reached at the moment is such a deep understanding of the psyche that we can start creating the mindset that we want to create the behavior that we want. However, society effectively does completely the opposite. One, it assumes that everyone's in complete control, conscious control of their behavior. But if you took one behavior, compulsive behavior, and this is something that I suffered from last number of years, is that when the pandemic hit, I was working so hard that I put on about 20 kilos.
Mm.
And then I'm trying to justify, oh, I'm busy, I'm doing good work, whatever. Like, yeah, you can. It doesn't take long to cook healthy, and it doesn't take long to do a bit of a workout at home. So once I got over that, but if someone's compulsively eating, does anyone really think that that person doesn't know that that's not healthy? Okay, you ask any personal trainer about their clients that are struggling with weight, that client will have more books on nutrition than the personal trainer. So we very much rationalize that it's all about information. And whilst information is really important, it's not just about information. So if someone has a compulsive behavior, most of the time they try to stop that. Okay, but if we understand that compulsive behavior is driven by usually a survival strategy, so the survival strategy in that instance might be food is comfort for me, which it was for me. So when I'm stressed, I will eat food. But
Hmm.
what does that presuppose? It presupposes that I'm stressed. So if I can deal with the initial thing that I don't experience the stress, then I don't have any need to eat the food. And then I don't. Do you see how it's just taking it back to its, we call it the etiology of the problem. But there is huge benefit in managing the problem. There's huge benefit in changing the environment. There's huge benefit in reframing what people see. But as a long-term solution, when we can recode, and by recode, a person then is shown how to choose what beliefs they want for themselves.
Hmm.
Because we're not born with I'm not good enough. You watch a 4-year-old child, it will run into the room with a Batman t-shirt and going, here I am.
Yep.
We have to learn those things, which presupposes they're not actually.
Well, and they're so sneaky.
If we can return back to it. Sorry, go on.
Get a little glitch there. They can be so
Sorry,
sneaky.
God, I interrupted you there.
One big aha I had recently, a problem that always comes up for me is this busyness, disorganization, chaos. And I like to just scratch that off and just say, oh, that's just who I am. That's my ADHD. I always have this closet's always messy, like for an obscene amount of time. We're talking 2 years, this closet has been messy. And I got to this point with my therapist that like why is this the recurring problem? And when she really presses on my pain point, it's the hurt that I've experienced in this world from my friends, from my community. And I realize that unconsciously, I create extra mess, extra work for myself so that I can't go and participate. I don't have time to go out for dinner. I don't have time to do these things. I'm too busy. So unconsciously, I was creating mess, which was creating more work. It was making things more inefficient. So I would have less free time. I was just hiding myself in my work. That was such a big, helpful
Yeah.
aha. 'Cause then the messy closet just seemed really, really like go and clean the closet. It's not a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's such a beautiful insight, because one of the other behaviors that we do is an avoidance behavior. So there's really four ways that our beliefs manifest. So you've got compulsive avoidance behavior, then you've got triggered emotion, or you've got mood. And they're the four ways that we really manifest these things. And that's taken from the Lefko Institute, which has really been profound for me. And they do belief work. And the fascinating thing is that institute should be 1,000 times more popular than it is. And it's had 100,000, 120,000 people go through there, but it should be a lot more popular. But the reason is because we adapt to our problems so quickly. So I was talking with my coach this morning. He just wanted some feedback how things were going. I said, pretty good. And I was explaining, because I've studied the adaptive unconscious, which is a part of the unconscious that controls a lot of our behavior and many other things. I was able to take the belief work and really draw out some diagrams of what it's doing. And we were talking, and I said to him, does he have the experience where he changes people's beliefs and they have incredible success, but then they don't tell everyone? He said, yeah. He says, I can't believe that we have such incredible success with this, but people should be biting his hand off to get a session, but they're not. Because what happens is if you've got 10 problems and then 8 of them disappear, we tend to focus on the 2 that's left.
Mm.
You don't really jump around saying, hey, I don't have a rat phobia anymore. This was funny. I had someone with a rat phobia and we resolved it. And then he's just like, yeah. Like, because previously, if a rat comes near, he screams and jumps. But now there's no reaction. You often don't notice the absence of problems.
Mm.
So it is. So it's so fascinating. But just coming back to the avoidance behavior, effectively, and this is one of the models that I think is so powerful for people to know. And it's effectively, there's 3 things that are really governing whatever we do. It's our conscious mind, our unconscious mind, and the environment. Okay, those 3 things interact to really create behavior. Now, the behavioral science in the choice architecture is about manipulating the environment so people change their decisions. But it's also about manipulating people's unconscious mind so they do what you want them to do. So, for instance, they get people hooked on all sorts of brands and foods and whatever. So even though the person doesn't want to eat it, they still do. Okay. And that's the thing about that. So if you imagine a diagram where you've got 2 pathways, okay, the key point is, where do the pathways lead? Okay, so you've got to kind of build the path to the outcome that you want. And the easier you make it. So in terms of behavior, the single most important element to all behavior happening is how easy that behavior is to happen.
Mhm.
Okay, so for instance, when it comes to the organ donation, they did a very unethical thing, in many people's opinion, in the UK, that they changed it from opt out to opt in. Okay,
Mm.
so they defaulted you to opt in. And what happens is that people don't opt out, whether they wanted to, they just don't get around to it. So it went from like single digits to high 90s. Now, as Zoe Chance, who's a very, very intelligent behavior scientist, and her book's fantastic, but like many of them, they still have fundamental belief in corporations will do things for the right reason rather than for money, is that she said, what's easier than checking a box? Not checking a box.
Mhm.
Okay. So what you're going to find is that people move towards what's easy. So if understand the environment, what they did by the manipulation, in my opinion, in an exit connotation, was they made it so simple to comply you can argue that people like Amazon and other companies that use it in a sales way, which is Amazon, that one click, that's all about making what you wanted to buy something as easy as possible.
Mhm.
And when it comes to returning business, how easy it was to interact with you is the single most important factor whether people come back. Okay, so if you picture the pathway, what you're doing is you're laying out the pathway. And in fact, in the freedom movement, people need to understand this. If you want people to do stuff, make it easy.
Mhm.
Okay, you know, make it so you take out all the ambiguity, you make it simple, you make it clear, you make it relevant, you make it that they know what they're doing, how the effect is going to have, all these things. It will make the person's chances of doing that behavior, and it's important if they want to do that behavior, that's how shaping the path is a good thing, because that person wants to do it. So you make it easier for that person to do it. If that person doesn't want to do it, you make it easier, then that's obviously not a good use of it. So then you've got the two left things, which are the conscious and the unconscious. Now, the rider so anyone that's been horse riding will know that the rider doesn't have the last say. Okay. If the horse doesn't want you to go where you want to go, you're not going there. Okay. So then it comes back to that primal thing that the unconscious mind is going to move towards pleasure and away from pain. Okay. So but people can kind of force it under certain conditions, but you're always going to be fighting against yourself. So when we can condition our unconscious mind, which we obviously should have the role to do that because it's ours, other people shouldn't be doing that to us unless we're paying them to do it and we're stipulating where we want them to take us. So with a therapist or practitioner, you're effectively doing, I want to go here, can you help me condition my unconscious mind to go there? That's when then you think, oh, this is quite incredible. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to have momentum to go that way. I'm not going to have to force myself. It's going to be, so some people are just naturally successful. Yeah. Whatever they do, touch goes to gold. That's because they're so conditioned with such a powerful set of beliefs. Yeah. You see these people, your problem comes up, great opportunity, right? They're great people to be around.
Yeah. Oh, it has such a huge effect. I stopped listening to documentaries every now and then. Like I listen to some Joe Rogan. I like to keep abreast of what's happening in the world. But 2 years ago, I switched, and it was really hard to switch back to the things that I would normally listen to prior to 2020. So coaching podcasts, things about business, just really upbeat things. It felt like spiritually bypassing. It felt fake. And I just knew I needed to grind through that because it would do something to me. And now you would laugh what I start my day with. I will listen to 25 minutes of affirmations while I'm brushing my teeth and getting ready.
Yeah.
My day, it literally manifests success in my day when I do that. And then if I have a day where I start off listening to the news, everything goes wrong that day. Everything.
Yeah. When the news primes you, priming, by the way, just to mention what that is. Doing affirmations is priming yourself, yeah, and they don't always work because if someone says an affirmation, it's what they feel is the key thing. So if you can really get into the feeling, that's it. Here's the thing: the conscious mind is language, linguistics, conscious thought, pitch, all these things, but the unconscious mind is the feeling animal. It's emotion. See, and this is or certainly my current opinion of this, is that consciousness developed after the rest of the brain. So in fact, there's no language center in the adaptive unconscious, that bit that's doing the hard work. So you have to communicate with it through feelings, emotions, pictures, sensations, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's the key. So when you can create an affirmation and you can feel that it's good and you get a positive vibration, that has a very powerful effect. And yeah, it's so profound then, because then the priming, to explain what that is, so if I said to you, are you open-minded? Okay, that's a bit of a trick question because 99.5% of people say yes, and clearly that's not the case. If you say people, are they better than the average driver, 85% say yes. So we're very optimistic about our own capabilities, which is which is a good thing in some ways because it enables you to try more things. But what's funny about priming is that it will elicit that state of a person's mind, and it can be used for good. So I say to someone, we need to look at this critically. Okay. Once they agree, because it's like setting the boundaries, then they're going to want to look to see themselves as critical. So it's going to elicit that powerful part of the mind. For instance, it can be used for lots of good things. It's always best to be open and honest, obvious for the obvious reasons. But they had a Dutch supermarket, and they would give them on the way in a recipe, okay, which looks innocuous. But what happened was, because the recipe had some health foods on it, those people bought 80% less junk food if they were on a diet or they were concerned about their health. Those that didn't, it didn't have any effect. But by being primed, I reminded about being healthy. That person's behavior reflected that significantly. You see, that's just the slight priming. So when we prime ourselves, not watching the news is generally a good thing. I mean, in today's world, you're not going to get much information that's true anyway. And also, you're going to get manipulated if you watch the video portion of the news. You want to read the written word. But it's about priming ourselves to feel good. Priming it. So what would happen if you watched a 5-minute dog video, or a cat video, or whatever your passion is? You're going to feel good. Then whatever you do after then, you're going to do it with that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. So understanding priming allows you to say, right, well, I'm going to design my environment that it makes me feel good. Okay. And when I feel good, I'm going to do better things. But look what's going on in the environment we're in at the moment. It's
That was,
almost total bad news.
yep. And that was my next question. Knowing what you know, what do you see but what do you see us being primed for now?
Well, I mean, the comedy meme is the alien invasion at some point because you have but basically it's going to be more the same. Okay, the structure sets to be the same. There's going to be this new crisis that we need to have to be scared about. We need to hand away our freedoms. We need to have some expert tell us what to do. And then we generally go and buy some product that they're selling us. That's the standard structure. Once you see through the content and you see the structure of it, you stop buying it. Okay. But then once you're aware, here's the key next point, and you notice it was on a lot of speakers. And my interpretation of it was do one thing. Okay, we have an epidemic of apathy, which isn't a critical. Do people decide to be apathetic?
Do they decide to be apathetic? Yes, I think some make a choice to check.
But really think about it. Okay.
Well, here's one thing I'm seeing a burnout effect
Yeah.
leading to apathy. So you gave the alien example. Last year, I believe it was last year, what even is time? There was a military man in the US Senate. He said on live TV, in court, that they found a UFO with a non-human entity in it. And I watched that. I almost felt nothing. Nothing happened. There was it was a very official reporting. I was like, the US government just said that there are actually aliens. I watched this and nobody cared and nothing really happened.
Nobody batted an eyelid.
Did you see that in the UK?
I did. I think I may have done, but see, what you've then got is this dissonance that's going on. The person then has two realities in their mind. Aliens don't exist, aliens do exist. So then there's this dissonance.
Yeah.
Coming back to that question, it's really key because apathy can be created. Okay, learned helplessness can be created in a person. All you do is those two pathways. Remember the two pathways, you block both off. And then what happens is the person learns to be helplessness, and then it becomes apathetic because what they feel is that anything they do won't have any effect. Now that's, I think, for the most part, you're right. People can decide, oh, sod it. But for the most part, it's a response to what's going on, and it tends to be automatic. So then the question is, if people are on purpose making a large body of the population feel that they can't do anything about their circumstances, then you're going to see a huge amount of apathy, and you're going to see then low voting rates and everything else. And that's a different conversation, whether it matters who you vote for, because if both parties are controlled by the same person, it wouldn't. But if you get someone in that can support the people, then they can make a difference in certain instances. A lot of the systems have to change. But here's where it gets interesting. How can we empower ourselves for less apathy? Okay, and this is where we're saying, do one thing. Okay, if you're doing one thing, what are you not doing?
I mean, you're taking action and not just thinking about things.
Yeah, so if you're doing one thing, you're not doing nothing.
Right.
So that's why we say do one thing. Now, I told that story when I was in Geneva, and for me, what triggered my understanding of how the world works was watching a Ed Griffin seminar. And then what happened was, on one of the calls, somebody said, I've literally just spoke to Ed, here's his details. So I messaged him, said that he was instrumental in getting me doing some action. And then I'm in Geneva, I'm sitting with one of the professors who spoke at the Geneva rally, and I tell this story to her, and she says, oh my God, the hair on the back of my head's gone up. She said the same thing. And she said what happened to her is that she's in a seminar, and Ed's got a bunch of middle-class people there that all know what's going on. And he said to them, what are you doing? And they all sort of sheepishly well, we know. And he said, just do one thing. And she watched that, this professor, and that has stayed with her and been instrumental in her standing up over the last 4 years and doing hundreds of things. But the minute you do one thing, you're not doing nothing. Okay. And sometimes we think that for learning to ride a bike, for instance, we think about that moment where everything comes together. But that's not the moment you learn. That's the moment where everything comes together. You've got hundreds of moments that lead up to that. Okay. And that's the thing. And every time you do one thing, you sitting here now, Carla, you might have done one thing last week where you connected two people together, and then that's going to have millions of people do something. Okay, we don't know. That's why we said to everyone, I was on a call last night, I said to everyone, I guarantee everyone on this call has had a positive effect on someone, and they might not realize. Okay, what does that feel like now? Do you feel motivated? Absolutely, because what happens is that the media is hiding from everyone why things are truly happening. So in New York, I think Aaron Siri, I think is CHD, one of the lawyers, brilliant guy by the sounds of things. He beat New York State in the courts on many different things. Other people beat them in the courts on the mask mandates. In the UK, we beat them on the NHS 100K, and then you can just go on and on and on, where the reality that a number of people wanted to happen didn't happen because of either a large body of people or sometimes one person. One lady come up to me at one of the conferences, and she said, oh, I just want to thank you for the work. And I said, well, you're welcome. You know, what happened? And she said, well, she went to one of the supermarkets in the UK. She got their mask mandates overturned in 24 hours. One person. So we are continually told that we can't make a difference. And if anything, you've seen the last few years that everyone can do anything. And I'm saying everyone. Okay. That person that came up to me, she didn't have 5 PhDs. Okay. She didn't have. So it's really, and what happens then? When you do something like that, you then know you can, and it's not going to be the first time. You're going to do one after the other after the other.
Well, I always tease Natalie because Natalie was just one person that woke me up, and look at what a problem I've become.
Yeah. Well, look I wouldn't have probably been there at the weekend if it wasn't for Natalie.
Yes, exactly.
So I attended the BC Rising. I provided some materials and workshops, and then Natalie was on there. So then she drops me an email. So then we have a call. Then she messages Jonathan. Then we have a call. Then I'm there, and then the conference changed me. Okay, so all those speakers are affecting me. So we're affecting everyone all the time. And sometimes it can be one sentence.
Yes.
One sentence, one person says to another, and they go, yeah, I can do something. And then imagine everyone that's listening to this or everyone that's on the calls with their power. They just have a little trigger, a little spark that someone says, do one thing. They go do one thing. And that's literally how so many of these things happen.
Mm. It's very underwhelming for people too, in the best way possible. I was gathering community in 2020 and we were teaching them preparedness. So we brought in financial people and homesteaders and people would panic and they'd say, "Well, what do I work on first?" I said, "It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Pick one thing. Just
Yeah.
one."
Just get started. See, the ninja move in getting things done is to start.
Mhm.
It is, because there's a reason for it, actually. What happens is that you use a different part of the brain than you do to start something, then you do it. So what happens is, because I know this, and we all procrastinate at times. So if I've become aware of procrastination, I open a PowerPoint presentation or a document and I just put a title in and I just save it. I have now got over the hardest part of that.
Yes.
So that's the ninja.
My
Start.
my coach used to say, "Okay, great, when?" Because I'm
Yeah.
like an ideas person, and she'd put me, and if you know me, picking a date is the hardest thing for me because I'm not misorganization, and she'd always put me on the spot. Date. Okay, great, when? And I'd have to pick a date in the spot, and that was always the hardest thing. Once I have the date,
Yeah.
whew, I can make it happen.
Well, that's actually really powerful, because what happens is, and they've done this, when you just ask people how they're going to do it, how they're going to get there, when they're going to do it, it
Mhm.
starts becoming reality. It's
Yes.
no longer just this airy fairy thing in the mind. It's suddenly they start building the plan. They start thinking about it. It really comes into being.
Yeah, clarity creates direction, direction creates speed.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
You seem very optimistic about the world, very optimistic, very positive. What do you see for ourselves in the future that's going well right now? What are you excited about? What are you seeing that makes you feel confident in our direction right now?
I think it's self-awareness.
Mhm.
When I look at myself over the last few years, and they say a fool who persists in his folly will become wise. That was the Alan Watts back in the 70s. And what I've seen in the change in myself, even from last weekend, for over the last 2 years, I think, right, if I can change after 50 years on this planet and suddenly change that much in a short space of time, and seeing other people change, that knowing that this next sentence is not the cheesy kind of statement, it's actually a profoundly deep statement. Change comes from within. Okay. When we understand, there's a model in NLP, it's called neurological level model, and it shows that behavior, so the single biggest factor to whatever I'm going to do is literally what I'm going to do. It's my behavior. But what drives my behavior? It's going to be my skill sets. What drives my skill sets? It's going to be my belief systems. What drives my belief systems? It's going to be my identity. What drives my identity? Sometimes my group identity. Behavior you can see. Everything else is inside.
Mhm.
So anything that changes inside is going to have a profound effect outside. So when a person turns around and decides and realizes, hang on a minute, I am in control of what happens to me.
Mhm.
What I believe has a difference. They are going to start acting very differently. See what happens? And that's for me, whereas, and the work that I am trying to do at the moment is, a lot of it's on the communication and understanding behavior, messaging, all those things. So they're critically important. But if we can change, if we can show people how they can change their own belief system, that's going to have a ripple effect far greater than anything that we can force ourselves to do.
Mhm.
My sense, and when we become aware of this collectively, that if someone's called Team A and someone's called Team B, when they realize they're still both part of humanity, then we can transcend those labels. Because in fact, the divide is always driven by three things, which is one is the label. Now, there was a lot of research in the 70s and 80s on this, and there's some famous things about the scouts at Cove, etc., which was one of the studies. But effectively, it was studied, and it was Tajfel, I do believe, Homi Tajfel, that wanted to understand what created conflict, what created divide. So he created all these studies, and do you know what his conclusion was? There's no baseline. It isn't race, creed, culture, sexuality, none of this. It's a label. Once you got the label, you can get identification. So I am part of this team. Once you got identification with that label, you then get comparison. My team's better than your team. And all you need between those two things is a little bit of conflict, and then it can escalate very quickly. And as humans, when we become aware of that, we transcend that, then we can't be divided anymore to a degree. That makes sense. We have to see, one of the biggest things about that is that in order to have the conflict, you almost have to dehumanize the other people. That's what a label does. A classic example was 1914 in the First World War on the front line. I don't know if you've heard of this because it's very much a British story, is that at Christmas in 1914, what happened was that they had a ceasefire. And Robert Sapolsky, I think is at Stanford, tells this story very well. But my understanding, if I can remember correctly, is that they had a ceasefire because there was too many bodies in no man's land and it was quite difficult to fight. So they had a ceasefire. And then what happened was that the British soldiers and the German soldiers went out into no man's land and they started burying the bodies in the icy ground. And then what happened was the German soldiers started helping the British soldiers and the British soldiers started helping the German soldiers. And what happened was the label of German and British soldiers it was now another human being, and that human being is helping me. So that's what creates the common ground, is what creates people transcending divide and conquer. So they start helping each other, and then they start exchanging details to connect after the war. And gets crazy. Then they had a football match, right? 2 days before, they're shooting each other in the space of literally hours. They're now playing football. After that, when they stopped the ceasefire, both sides didn't want to fight anymore. They had to go in, they had to send officers into the trenches to threaten to kill people if they didn't continue to fight again. So when we rehumanize each other, when we don't see someone as a sheep or an idiot or anything, when we really rehumanize, and yes, they may have made bad decisions, they may have been easily vulnerable, they may have been, any number of things. But when we can rehumanize them as another human being, a man, a woman, or a child, then those labels lose their power. And that's it. And that's the coming together, and when people, you can't, that's the thing. Again, it's not conscious. When you feel that love from someone and it's genuine, it's going to be very difficult to be angry at them.
This is the work that the freedom community needs to do, because I know a lot of people are listening to this and they're thinking, oh yes, those other guys need to do this work, but it's us. And I know a lot of people want to be vindicated, and it's really hard to hold this compassion, especially in places like Twitter. But what's more important than our personal vindication is getting ourselves out of this mess.
Yeah, that's really key. And what I would say on that is that what's happening and let's call the freedom movement, is people that want good for the world. They want their families, their communities to live in a fair and just society. What those people are being asked to do is not fair. Okay, let's get that. It's not fair. It's not right. And once we can get over that and say, okay, well, I'm going to have to say I'm going to get the apologies later. And you'll get some. I had one from a friend, must be almost a year ago now, where I had to unfriend him because he was just posting all sorts of nonsense when I would make a comment. And then he sent me a message. He says, "Dear David, I owe you an apology. Okay, I thought you were a crack 3 years ago, but I've done a 180 on my views. I'm now informed. And if you're ever around, it'd be nice to talk to you again." Okay, now everyone deserves at least one of those apologies. Okay, in the people that have spoke up and the people that knows what's going on. You might get it later than sooner, but first acknowledge what's happened to you is not fair. It's not right. It goes against, a just society. You may have loads of emotions to process, which is understandable. If someone's literally, used this amount of propaganda on you, you might need a bit of support. You might need a community, but first just acknowledge that it's not fair. It's not right. You probably have a good true north, and you're going to have a lot of anger, but know that if you can sit with that anger and process it and transform it, then you're going to have a much better chance of talking to someone that's fallen for the propaganda. Okay, and there's many different types of people. There's some people that know they're doing wrong, and they really should spend they're going to have to answer to that. There's going to be a number of people that need to lose their jobs or go to prison or whatever it is. And there's going to be different sliding scales of whatever that person's done. But there's also a large number of people that just were unaware and were asleep at the wheel. Okay, I spoke to a gentleman about 6 months ago, and we managed to get him an interview with one of the groups. And he phoned me up and he said, "I've just been given your number, and I want to get my story out. My wife and me, we took the vaccine, and my wife was a healthy runner, and she passed away." And talking to that man, if someone would tell me, would you have empathy for that man, I would have to think about it, etc. But when I hear, this man's lost the woman he loves. Okay. And he was told, and yes, maybe all people should have looked a bit deeper, but sometimes, someone tells me that's good to do. And, if I'm asleep at the wheel, sometimes I can do that. But to hear his story, I couldn't have anything, and you probably feel it in my voice, just empathy for the man.
Yes.
He then wanted to share his story with other people, because when that happened, no one would listen to him. His doctor said, "Oh, it's just a coincidence." It's absolutely clear. This absolutely healthy woman, within a very short space time of taking it, and then he had other problems, and yeah, that's the thing. Being told and seeing are two different things.
Yeah.
And yeah, and your point's very right, very correct, very right, that if we don't learn to transcend this divide and conquer, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get a fair and just society.
Well, and what you highlighted there is we need patience enough to actually even hear the whole story.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law died right before COVID. My sister-in-law had two tiny little kids and was pregnant. And when this started coming out and we were trying to tell her not to get this, she just said, "I can't. I can't hear any of this. I'm dealing with
Yeah.
so much." And I just said, "I get it. I get it." And like no one could ever fault her for her decisions because that's where she was.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
But that's the thing. When you put people under pressure, then it becomes this really just fighting the next thing. And that's the big tactic of this, scare the hell out of people, make them decide. Because we've had propaganda to a level that's never been experienced through history. And this is why we can really learn from this. Read the documents, like Mindspace document. In the UK, there's a Canadian equivalent. But if you were to search on the internet, Mindspace, and then Gov, you'll come across the Mindspace government. And if you just have a read of that, and you then just say, right, is my government acting in my best interest? And if it's not, we need to vote them out. And obviously then the other ones coming in just as bad. But then we've got to learn. Yeah. And my thing on that is I think you've got much more chance of an independent representing the people than a party. Because if a party member's told they're going to toe the party line or get excluded from the party, they're not going to get elected. So, the decentralization is very key, because like this stuff that's coming in where you say to a big company, you need to do this or you lose your license. What are they going to do? They're going to play ball.
Hmm.
Okay? But if all the companies got together and all the individual people, and I'm not a big fan of big companies, but it doesn't mean the company's big, it has to be bad.
Hmm.
It's possible to have a big company that really serves the people. It's
Hmm.
not because it's a big company. It does create this situation where a lot of the time profits become too important, etc. But I think we're at that stage where we've really got to learn, strategize, understand these things, and yeah, really find a way to work together on a solution. Yeah, there's going to be controlled opposition. There's going to be people doing bad things. But one of the biggest problems we've got is this hypervigilance. Understandable because our trust has been betrayed. But we've got to create situations where we collectively agree, in whatever different groups are in, on an outcome, and then together work towards that.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's time.
Those that don't believe in that will reveal themselves.
Hmm.
Yeah, and you exclude them from the group. But we've got to be. There's a thing called hands-on's razor, which is give people the benefit of the doubt. I know that's going to be difficult, but we need to do that. I think more than the opposite.
I agree. It's our only way through, and this war of the left and the right and the awake and the asleep. It's not getting us anywhere. We have to
Yeah,
build bridges now.
yeah. Well, you think about if you've got two people having an argument, okay, and they hold different views about what's going on. The thing that people don't realize, what's missing from that argument is the person that created the problem. That's why the divide and conquer is so powerful, because you create a shitty situation, two people then argue, and then the person that's walking away with the profits is usually not in the picture.
Yes.
And that's why there's that meme that the king is standing there, he says, oh, we got a problem. And then his assistant says, it's all right, just tell the pitchforks that the shovel people are the problem.
Yep.
That's it. But if both those groups turn around and say, hang on a minute, who's setting the rules? Who's raising the taxes? Who's selling our assets and then keeping the profits? Like, really to start to ask those questions. They realize that for the large majority, the public has just been pitched against each other.
That's right. And no one wants to think that they've been manipulated. So even the freedom community, what I try and remind them of when they say that they hate the left or they hate this country, I have to remind them that's what they want. They
Yeah,
want you to hate other citizens. They want you to hate your country. They want you to think that politics doesn't matter. They win when you play into that game.
absolutely. They're wise words because it comes back to the Voltaire quote at the beginning. You can
Mhm.
convince me of absurdities, I could commit atrocities. And most of the time, a lot of these people, not always, some people have bad intentions with good ideas, some people have bad intention with bad ideas, but a lot of the time you have people with good intention and bad ideas.
Mhm.
They're the ones that when they get the good ideas, because a lot of we ran one of our presentations was on how to hijack a movement. And all you do is you take people with good intentions and give them bad information, and they end up doing some really stupid things,
Yeah.
right? Because they think what they're doing. Because if you give them bad information, then that's literally it's a recipe for disaster. And that's what's happening. So many people that want to do good, okay, they're not realizing that they've been given bad information.
Mhm. David, this was so good today. Thank you for your time. You have a course specifically for Canadians. Um, tell us about that.
Okay, so we did a lot of work with BC Rising, just a great bunch. They seem to be really, not egos, people that want to do so. A lot of doctors, medical professionals, scientists, a lot of great citizens in there. So we were assisting them in every way we could. And then they were like, okay, look, let's do a course, so at least you get a little bit to support the project. So we did it for a nominal fee, which turned out about $10. I think because the exchange rates changed, it's a lot less than that. So it might be about $8. And that was available to all the BC Rising groups. But we said, let's keep that for the Canadians and and the people from the conference. If you go to, which I think I sent the link, it's if you go to reachingpeople.net, there's a thing that says all courses, and that course there is really that there's another 2 hours going up today, so there's 6 hours of the course, and then what you've got is loads of really useful videos and information that we found that you can also go through, and it's like Udemy, so you just go through those bits one at a time, and that very much is people can watch it, do it, etc. But what we also got is 3 online workshops, and we run them regularly each month, that if you want us then to walk you through it, to give you exercises so you learn it much quicker, then you can also do those. And our philosophy is, let's give the people the information so they can make their own decisions. But the information isn't always that simple. So for nominal fees, we can walk you through it as well.
And just to be clear, you want me to use this behavioral science for good and not evil, correct?
Yes. Now, that's where, because the thing is, it's like a tool.
Yes.
Okay. You give someone a hammer, they can build a house, but they can also destroy a house, but they can use it as a weapon. So behavioral science up to now has been used as a weapon a lot of the time, and we want to use it as a tool. And it's not black and white. There's definitely parts of the behavioral science that you should never use. Okay. There's other parts that aren't really a technique per se. It's just a way to understand how the brain works. And that's a given, that if you understand how you function, you're going to be in a position to manage yourself and lead others better. So there's a whole range of things in there. Yeah, so it's very powerful, but I think it will allow us to understand ourselves better, and then we can get better solutions.
I'm going to go get it for sure. Really appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing, David, especially coming over to Canada and giving us this opportunity here too.
Thank you. It was a pleasure really to come. I've experienced more love the last few weeks than because I do a lot of work on my own. I'm out in the sticks. It's been a pleasure. And I think Canada is absolutely in a position to really make some incredible changes that the rest of the world can see and witness and follow. Watching the convoy, you guys have no idea, like watching that from the UK, because we've got a lot of Canadians in our group anyway. And a number of them were saying, "Oh, I'm embarrassed because we're not doing anything." And then, boom, you guys did something that rippled throughout the world. And I think that's something to be very proud of. That whole thing. And one phone call, we saw them at the weekend, one phone call, they just did something, everyone got in there, and then it was an explosion of good feeling around the world. Yeah, so I think Canadians really want to be proud of. Yeah, and a lot of us, so many people got caught sleeping at the wheel, but now we know, let's do something. Let's make a positive impact.
Just one thing.
Just one thing. And you're not doing nothing. You're doing something. Brilliant. Been a pleasure, Carla.
Thank you.
Been underground, now I aim for the sky. Don't quit now, you can last longer. All these wounds only making you stronger. Don't